Hello, this is Brian Foster, and welcome to our live stream on Tuesday, August 3rd, 2021. Now, for those who are on Facebook, I will put a comment in here so that you can go to the group comments on Be Live TV. But if you're on YouTube, you can put comments in all you like. So today we are on part 3, The Kingdom of Hell, chapter 24, the story of Benedetto, plotters baffled. Now, Franchezzo, as I've said before, is a spirit that was in the lower zone. Then his love of his life kind of rescued him. She was still in the physical plane. He met her and then died very soon after. It was like, that was the love of his life. She helped draw him out of his pettiness, his cruelty. He's not a normal cruelty person, but everyone has tendencies. And he had just left. The last time we talked was in chapter 23, and he just left the palace of one of his ancestors who had been trying this whole time to get him down to his palace. And he said every time he had bad thoughts, he tried to amplify them. That's how spirit world works. Take your thoughts and try to amplify that which is not good as far as the lower level. And as the higher level spirits, the good spirits, I should say, the mature spirits, everyone has good and bad in them, even the low levels. But the mature spirits try to amplify and give him intuition of following the correct path. So, but he's doing great. He's been doing great. He's been helping people. And now, this is the carry on of the story. He's on a mission to wander through the dark abyss. Now, he calls it hell. There is no hell, according to Spiritism, codified by Allan Kardec in the 1850s, that it is just a temporary place where people go. Let me bring this up. Let me hide this. Where people go when they're too materialistic or criminal thoughts or criminal actions, but then eventually they will get out of it. And this is what happens to everyone. Everyone eventually rises to be a perfect spirit. Now, right now, we are completely imperfect spirits, right? We're on a planet of atonement, a planet where we go and we have to live life after life in our quest to become better. But we are heading towards a planet of regeneration. And we started that around the year 2000 to be a more advanced planet where we don't have to go through these really dramatic and tough trials and tribulations. It will be more smoother, it will be more in concert, and it'd be more consultative with our spirit benefactors. Okay, let me. Oh, before I forget, the Spirits book, you can get it on PDF. Just type in Allan Kardec space PDF in any search engine, and you'll find his books free on PDF. I also, of course, have his whole book in audio on my YouTube channel. It uses the playlist, the Spirits book playlist. I also have it on downloadable audio on my site, nwspiritism.com. You can download it in MP3 or an audible format. Okay, let us start with the chapter. Okay, where I put it. Oops, wrong way. There we are. Now, this is the whole thing. Okay, chapter 24. The story of Benedetto, plotters again, baffled. Now, faithful friend now proposed to me that we should visit one more city in this strange land. Now, faithful friend is probably a slightly superior spirit to Franchezzo, and he's been helping him and he's been kind of guiding him. And I believe that faithful friend is more in touch with the higher spirits that manages, because he always seems to come in at the right perfect time. And of course, this is something I think that we should know. What people call hell or purgatory. It's more like a purgatory because it's temporary. We think people are in there and they're randomly just, mean to each other and they're horrible positions. And, they are randomly mean to each other and they're in a horrible place. But Jesus Christ is in charge of heaven. He's also in charge of all this. There's nothing that goes on that he and his managers and his assistants don't know about. People are in this lower zone and this dark abyss for edifying purposes, so they can be with people like them. It's the opposite of the golden rule. People, people will treat you as you treated others, and then you can find out the full effect of that. Some people are in there for thousands of years. Some people are in there for months, because it all depends on how long it takes you to figure out that this is not the place I want to be. I need to change my attitude, my character. Okay, I'll carry on. In order that I might see the man whose fate might have been my own, but for the constancy and love which would so help and sustain me. Our earthly histories were in some respects different, but there were some points of resemblance both in that and our dispositions, which would make the sight of this man and the knowledge of his history useful to me, though at a future time I might be able to help him. So the spirit world is always trying to help us. And they're trying to sort of Franchezzo, look, you have this wonderful woman there who stood by you even when you're dead. And now we want to show you what happens if you hadn't had that help, that love. What would have happened to you? This will more pierce into his character and his personality. And that's what spirits really calls. It calls personalities. We're like these little capsules of spirits with our own unique personality. And we go in from, when we go to the physical world, we inhabit different physical bodies, different sexes, different races, whatever. So let me carry on. It is now more than 10 years since this man has passed from Earth. It is only lately that he's begun to wish to progress. I found him here on my former visit to this place and was able to assist him a little and finally enroll him as one of our brotherhood. I am now told that he is shortly to leave this sphere for a higher one. Well, that's good. So he's actually getting a little bit better. I assented to the proposed journey, and after a short but very rapid flight, which in Spiritism we call it volitation, which means you travel by thought. So remember, in the spirit world, thought is action, and you'll see this all throughout this book. You see it reinforced all throughout. Spiritism is, we live in a objective world, meaning the wall is the wall, a house is a house. We feel like we're solid. Well, in fact, in the spirit world, it's subjective. You can affect the environment. Now, it's not perfectly subjective, because you don't set everything in stone, because there's other spirits around you. You are affected by their thoughts. There's higher spirits who have a much stronger will and faith that you will be absorbed in if you want, right? Because you'll feel comfortable with that. So, but it's more subjective. Of course, then they say even higher. There's higher rates than that, they say, which is sublime. And what that means, I'm not quite sure. Okay, I'll carry on. I assented to the proposed journey. After a short but very rapid flight, we found ourselves hovering over a wide lagoon, upon whose dark bosom there floated a great city, its towers and palaces rising from the waters, and reflected in them as a mirror of excuse me, as black marble veined with dark red lines that somehow made me feel there were streams of blood flowing through it. Overhead there hung the same dark pall of cloud, lighted by patches of steel gray and fiery red vapor, which I noticed in the other city. The appearance of this place suggested to me that we were about to enter the Venice of these lower spheres. And on my saying so, the faithful Farnese said, yes, and you will find many celebrated men whose names were written on the history of their times in letters of fire and blood. We found ourselves in the town and proceeded to pass through its principal canals and squares in order that I might see them. So it may surprise people that there are like representations of earthly cities in that lower zone of the rest of purgatory. That's because that's what people think, and they were drawn to that. And through affinity, they're drawn to that. Now, these cities are very imperfect, right? They're degraded, the paint's kind of bad, all these things. But they're there because that's how they think they should be. Okay, yes, there they were, these degraded counterparts of all those beautiful places made familiar by the brush of the artists, and the fame of those who have carved for themselves a niche in the temple of history. There flowed the canals, seeming like dark crimson streams of blood flowing from some vast shambles, washing and rippling up the marble steps of the palaces to leave there a thick, foul stain. The very stone of the buildings and pavements seemed to me to ooze and drip blood. The air was thick with its red shade. Deep down below the crimson waters, I saw the skeleton forms of thousands who had met their deaths by assassination or more legalized forms of murderers, and whose bodies had found shelter beneath the dark waves. Below, in the dungeons which honeycombed the city, I beheld many spirits crowded together, and like caged wild beasts, the ferocity of the cruel tiger in their gleaming eyes, and the vindictive malice of the chained human tyrant in every attitude of their crouching figures. So these are spirits, and these are spirits that went there and found themselves dominated by other spirits. And they said, "Oh, you're going to go to the dungeon. We're going to have fun. We're going to have fun playing with you and torturing you." Unfortunately, so this is what happens when you go down there. It's not a good place. This is why, I try to explain to people who are like, "Oh, Satanists," and they think, "Well, Satan has power." Well, there is no fallen angel called Satan. There are people who have been in charge. They think they're in charge, kind of warlords type in the dark abyss or purgatory, who then send out and guide them to try to have the earth not progress and to reward those who are stopping the progress. But when they go down, they'll just be treated like, what? They'll be treated horribly. They'll say, "Oh, you're just a rube." There's no honor. Hey, there's no honor among thieves. There's no honor among anyone in the lower zone. But carry on. Spirits whom it was needful to thus confine, since they are more ferocious than savage animals. Procession of city magistrates and their attendants, haughty nobles with their motley, following of soldiers and seamen and slaves, merchants and priests, humble citizens and fishermen, men and women of all ranks and of all times passed to and fro, and nearly all were alike degraded and repulsive looking. And as they came and went, it seemed to me as if skeleton hands, phantom arms, rose through the stones of the pavements from the dungeons beneath, striving to draw these others down to share their own misery. There was a hunted look on many of their faces, and black care seemed to sit behind them continually. Far out in the waters of the lagoon, spectral galleys floated, filled with slaves. I read it. Did this. Chained to their oars, but amongst them there were no longer the helpless victims of political intrigue or private revenge. These beings were the spirits of those who had been the hard taskmasters, the skillful plotters who had consigned many to this living death. Yet farther out to sea I could behold the great ships, and nearer at hand in the ruined harbor there were more spiritual counterparts of these piratical craft of the Adriatic, filled with the spirits of the piratical crews who had made plunder and rapine and more their delight, and now spent their time battling with one another, making forays upon others like themselves. Spectral looking gondolas floated upon the waterways of the city, filled with spirits bent still following the occupations and pleasures of their former lives. In short, in this Venice, as in all the other cities I had seen, there existed a life akin to that of earth, save that from this place all the good and pure and true, all the real patriots and unselfish citizens were gone, and only the evil left to prey upon each other and act as avenging spirits to their companions in crime. And that is a wonderful explanation of what that is like. And imagine if you lived in a city and there was no one nice around. It'd be like living in some city, let's say in North Korea or in Cuba, right? Where they were just, all they were was the communists and the comrades and the informers. And as soon as you do anything, they just went right after you. There was always, at least on Earth, there are some good people, but it was just completely, overwhelmingly people with not your well intended heart. And this is now to 100%. There's not that many nice people there. Now, I had said before, there's always good and bad everywhere. And even in these people, even in these warlords and who are, in charge of parts of hell, of the dark abyss, there is some little trace of goodness, and at some time that will come out and that will bloom. But it's hard to find down here. Okay, let me carry on. Oh, must have. Seated upon the parapet of one of the smaller bridges, we found a man wearing the dress of the Brothers of Hope, a dark gray robe such as I had worn myself in the earlier stages of my wanderings. His arms was folded upon his breast, and his face was so far concealed by the hood that we could not see his features. But I knew at once that this was the man we'd come to see, and I likewise recognized his identity, of that of a celebrated Venetian painter, whom I had known in my youth, though not very intimately. We had not met again, and I was ignorant that he had passed from earth, till I saw him sitting thus upon the bridge in the city of hell. I confess the recognition gave me somewhat of a shock, recalling as it did those days of my youth when I also was a student of art, with all the fairest prospects in life, as it would seem before us, and now to see him and to think what his life must have been to bring him to this pass. He did not see us, so faithful friend proposed that we should turn aside for a little, while he told me the spirit's history, and then we could approach together and speak to him. It seemed this man, whom I shall call by the spirit name of Benedetto, since his early life is better to be forgotten, had risen rapidly into fame after I knew him, and he had been fairly successful in selling his pictures. But Italy is not now a rich country. This is written about the end of the 19th century. And Benedetto's most wealthy patrons were the English and Americans who came to visit Venice. And at the house of one of them, Benedetto met the woman who was to overshadow his whole life and her baneful influence. I love these things when they talk about the history of people. He was young, handsome, talented, highly educated, and of an ancient, though poor, family, and therefore naturally received by all the best society in Venice. It was to a lady who belonged to the higher ranks of the social sphere that Benedetto lost his heart and dreamed in his youthful and romantic foolishness that she would be content to become the wife of a struggling artist with nothing but his brains and a growing reputation. The lady was scarce 20 when they first met, very beautiful, perfect alike in face and form, and endowed with all the charms which can enslave the heart of man. And she encouraged Benedetto in every way, so that, poor youth, he believed her love to be as sincere as his. But with all the passionate thirst of her nature for admiration and love, she was cold, calculating, ambitious, and worldly, incapable of either understanding or returning such love as she inspired in a nature like Benedetto's, which knows love or hate only in extremes. She was flattered by his attention, charmed by his passionate devotion, and proud of making a conquest of one so handsome and gifted. But she had no idea of sacrificing anything for his sake. And even when she was most tender, most alluring to him, she was striving with all her arts to become the wife of a middle-aged Venetian nobleman, whose wealth and position she coveted, even while she despised the man himself. So, again, this is let me go back to mine. So this happens, and here's this beautiful woman. And of course, we look upon people who are physically lovely as, oh, they're probably nice inside too. And that's not at all could be the case. And in fact, in Spiritist books, they talk about the fact that, they talk one scene, this beautiful woman went to bed and then she took one out of her body at night, because you can roam when you're sleeping, you can roam the spirit world. Let me put this up higher so you can read it better. There we go. Sorry about that. Should have had that before. So you can roam the spirit world, and she came out of the body just this ugly thing. And that's, of course, because in the spirit world, your inner self is reflected on your outer self. There's no There's no camouflaging what you really are in the spirit world. Okay, I'll keep reading. The end of Benedetto's dream came all too soon. He ventured to lay his heart and all his prospects at the feet of his inamorata, pouring into her ears all the love and devotion of her soul. And she, well, she received it very coolly and told him not to be a fool, explained how to him and how impossible it was she could do without money and position, and in fine dismissed him with a calm indifference to his sufferings, which nearly drove him mad. He fled from Venice, went to Paris, and there plunged into all the dissipations of that gay capital, striving to bury the recollection of his unfortunate passion. They did not meet for some years, and then Benedetto's fate took him back to Venice once more, cured as he hoped, and prepared to despise himself for his folly. He had now become famous as a painter and could almost command his own price for his pictures. He found that the lady had duly married the Marchese and was reigning as a society beauty and a queen of fashion, surrounded by a crowd of admirers whom she did not always feel it necessary to introduce to her husband. Benedetto had resolved to treat the lady with cool indifference should they meet. But this was not her intention. Once her slave, always so. No lover should dare to break her chain till she chose to dismiss him. She devoted herself once more to the subjugation of Benedetto's heart, and alas, that heart was only too ready to surrender when she told him, with every accent of feeling in her voice, how she regretted now the path she had chosen. Thus, Benedetto became her unacknowledged lover, and for a time he lived in a state of intoxication of happiness, but only for a time. The lady tired of everyone after a little. She liked fresh conquests, new slaves to do her homage. She liked excitement, and Benedetto, with his jealousy, his eternal devotion, grew tiresome, his presence wearisome. Moreover, there was another admirer, young, rich, handsome also, and the Marchesa preferred him and told Benedetto so, gave him, in fact, his, his exit for the second time. His passionate reproaches, his violent protestations, his vehement anger all annoyed the lady greatly, and as she grew colder, more insolent toward him, he grew more excited. He threatened, he implored, he vowed he would shoot himself if she proved false to him. And finally, after a violent scene, they parted and Benedetto went home. When he called the next day, he was told by the servant that the Marchesa declined to see him again. The insolence of a message thus given him, the heartlessness of the Marchesa, the bitter shame of being a second time trifled with and flung aside like an old glove, were too much for his passionate, fiery nature. He went back to his studio and blew out his brains. Oh, to never commit suicide. These are all tests for him. These things were not random, and you're on Earth. You're going through your blueprint. And many people who are in one of the levels of heaven actually contributed to that blueprint. So at one point in time, he must have done that to somebody else. He must have dallied with and played with some poor woman or another man if he came back as a man or woman before. But if he's a man in the spirit world now, he probably was a man before this life that he killed himself. So it was to teach him you should not do that, right? The lesson he should have learned instead of hating her is I will never do that to anybody else. You should always forgive because the spirit world does not like unresolved anger and a conflict among people. And just know that she was playing a part. Yes, and karma will catch up to her. She will go through what Benedetto's going through. So there's the spirit world. Jesus has plans, and all the spirits that help him and are his employees, I guess. I don't know what to call them, colleagues. I guess, of course, he tells them what to do, but it's all for a reason. So when people do wrong to you, just say, "Oh, did I do that to somebody else?" And okay, you who did that to me. Okay, yeah, I know I actually feel sorry for you. And that's what spiritists do. They actually feel more sorry for the criminal or the person who initiated the action than for the victim, because the victim's got it over. They've got that lesson over, and hopefully they learn from that lesson. And that's the other thing is you really should learn from your lesson, because if you don't, you'll be getting a more dramatic lesson next time. The spirit world won't give up. They're gonna try and give you ways to improve yourself. If you don't react, they'll give you a more dramatic way. Okay, let me carry on. When his spirit awoke to consciousness, it was to all the horrors of finding himself a prisoner in his coffin in the grave. He had destroyed his material body, but could not free his spirit from it, till the decaying of that body should liberate the soul. Those loathsome particles of that corrupting body still clothed the spirit. The link between them was not severed. Now, Spiritism tells us this so. Now, there's always exceptions, right? And people say, "Oh, this, she was driven to suicide." Yes. So some people who are just treated horribly, who are driven to suicide, and there's one woman who's the husband took her baby and threw it in the river and killed it, and then just was cruel to her. She did not have to go through this. But as a general rule, when you commit suicide, you're tied to that body. That body's in a coffin decaying until the time when you were supposed to have died according to your blueprint, according to your plan. So if you committed suicide at 50 and you're supposed to die at 65, you'd spend 15 years tied to that body. It would not be a pleasant experience. That's why you don't want to leave campus early. You're on the campus called Earth. You signed up to be here for 70 years, let's say, right? You got to stay. And, but the other thing to remember is spirits told this whole group of suicides, when they committed suicide, they went to this college and they're trying to help not to do this again. And they told them, look, whatever you think is terrible, there's always an end to it. It could be a week, a month, a year. There's always an end to it. Don't kill yourself. It's not meant to be complete defeat. It's meant to teach you something, this whatever tragedy you're going through. So if you have a horrible boyfriend, horrible girlfriend, husband, wife, don't commit suicide over it. It's meant to teach you something. Learn from it. Don't be like that person that's doing that thing to you, right? And know that if you had betrayed someone in a past life and that person now betrays you, but don't give up on that. Okay, I'll carry on. Oh, the horror of such a fate. Can anyone hear of it and not shudder to think what the bitter weariness and discontent of life and a reckless desire to be free of it at any cost may plunge the soul into? If those on earth would be truly merciful to the suicide, they would cremate his body, not bury it, that the soul may, by the speedy dispersal of the particles, be the sooner freed from such prison. The soul of suicide is not ready to leave the body. It is like an unripe fruit and does not fall readily from the material tree which it is nourishing it. A great shock had cast it forth, but it still remains attached. Thus, sustaining links shall wither away. Now, what he didn't know at the time that you're going to be attached. Even if the body is cremated, you'll be attached to earth. You won't be able to go to heaven, no matter what you think. Of course, there's exceptions, I keep saying, because you're tied to the earth. From time to time, Benedetto would lapse in unconsciousness and lose for a little the sense of his terrible position. And from these states of merciful oblivion, he would awaken to find that little by little the earthly body was losing its hold upon the spirit and crumbling into dust. But while it did, he had to suffer in all his nerves the pangs of this gradual dissolution. The sudden destruction of his earthly body, while it would have given him the spirit a more violent, more painful shock, would have at least spared him the slow torture of this lingering decay. At last, the material body ceased to hold the spirit, and he rose from the grave, but still hung over it, tied, though he was no longer imprisoned. Then the last link snapped, that's the perispirit cord, and he is free to wander forth into the earth plane. At first, his powers of hearing and seeing and feeling were most feebly developed. Then gradually they unfolded, and he became conscious of his surroundings. With these powers came again the passions and desires of his earthly life, and also the knowledge of how he could yet gratify them. And again, in his earthly life, he sought oblivion for the sorrow and bitterness and the pleasure of the senses, but it sought in vain. Memory was ever present with him, torturing him with the past. In his soul there was a wild hunger, a fierce thirst for revenge, the power to make her suffer as he had done. The very intensity of his thoughts at last carried to him where she was. He found her as old, surrounded by her little court of gay admirers, a little older, but still the same, still as heartless, still untroubled by his fate and indifferent to it. and it maddened him to think of the sufferings he had brought upon himself for the love of this woman. At last all thoughts became merged into one thought of how he could find means to drag her down from her position, how to strip her of all those things which she prized more than love or honor, or even the lives of those who might be called her victims. And he succeeded. For spirits have more powers than mortals dream of. Step by step, he saw her come down from her proud position, losing first wealth, then honor, stripped of every disguise she had worn, and known for what she was, a vile temptress who played with men's souls as one plays with dice, careless how many hearts she broke, how many lives she ruined, careless alike of her husband's honor and her own fair fame, so as long as she could hide her intrigues from the eyes of the world and rise a step higher in wealth and power upon the body of each new victim. And even in his darkness and misery, Benedetto hugged himself and was comforted to think it was his hands that were dragging her down and tearing the mask from her beauty and worldliness. She wondered how it was that so many events all tended to one end, her ruin. How was it that her most carefully laid schemes were thwarted, her most jealously guarded secrets found out and held up to the light of the day? She began at last to tremble at what each day might bring forth. It was as though some unseen agency, whose toil she could not escape, was at work to crush her. And then she saw to Benedetto and his last threats that if she drove him to despair, he would send himself to hell and drag her with him. She had thought he meant to murder her, perhaps, and then when she heard he had shot himself and was dead, she felt relieved and soon forgot him, save when some event would recall him to her mind for a moment. And now she was always thinking of him. She could not get away from the obtrusive thought. He was probably putting this thought in her head, and she began to shudder with fear lest he should rise from his grave and haunt her. Of course, now here's where it says, and all this time there stood Benedetto's spirit beside her, whispering in her ears and telling her that this was his revenge come to him at last. He whispered to her of the past and of that of love that had seemed so sweet and that had turned to bitterness, burning hate, consuming him as with the fire of hell, whose flames should scorch her soul also and drive her to despair as great as his. And her mind felt this haunting presence. Now, this is a good description of here he is, a spirit in the spirit world, and he is really attempting to obsess this person. So she, not having any spiritual morality to guide her, and she probably doesn't listen to her conscience much, right? Of what she's done. If she listened to her conscience, she would have done all this. But even if she'd done part of it and started becoming more spiritual, she would be asking for forgiveness. She would be praying. She would be meditating every day. But she's not. Therefore, she is completely vulnerable to spirits like Benedetto was. Spirits who are out for something not good. And this what happens. This is why and this is part of our training on earth. We swim through the sea of spirits. There's spirits all around us. It's amazing. And they interact with us, and we're not consciously aware of it. But in her mind, she's it's subconscious. It's coming. I'll carry on. And her mind felt this haunting presence even while her bodily eyes could see nothing. In vain she fled to society, to all places where there were crowds of men and women in order to escape. The haunting presence was with her everywhere. Day by day it grew more distinct, more real, something from which there was no escape. At last, one evening in the dim gray twilight, she saw him with his wild, menacing eyes, his fierce, passionate hate, expressing itself in every line of his face, in every gesture of his form. The shock was too much for her overwrought nerves, and she fell dead upon the floor. And then Benedetto knew that he had succeeded and had killed her, and that from henceforth the brand of Cain was stamped upon his brow. Then a horror of himself seized upon him. He loathed the deed he had done. See, his conscience took over. He knew he was probably being influenced by other spirits. As a spirit, which happens, right, to be this mean. Had intended to kill her, and then when the spirit left the body to drag it down with him and to haunt and torment forever, so that on neither side of the grave should she know rest. But now his only thought was to escape from himself and the horror of his success. For all good was not dead in this man, and the shock that had killed the Marchesa had awakened him to the true nature of his revengeful feelings. Then he fled from the earth, down, even to the city of hell, the fit dwelling place for such as he. It was in this place that I found him, said faithful friend, and was able to help the now repentant man and to show him how he might best undo the wrongs he had done. He awaits now the coming of this woman he so loved and hated, in order that he may ask her to forgive him, and that may he forgive her, and that he may forgive her himself. She had also been drawn to the sphere, for her life was very guilty, and it is this counterpart of the city which saw the history of their earthly love that they will meet again. And that's why he awaits her upon this bridge, where in the past she had also often met him. And will she meet him soon? Franchezzo asked. Yes, very soon, and then will the sojourn of this man in the sphere be over, and he'll be free to pass to a higher one, where his troubled spirit shall at last know a season of rest, ere it mounts by slow and painful steps the stony pathway of progression. Will she too leave with him? Oh, no, no. She'll also be helped to progress, but their path will lie widely asunder. There is no true affinity between them, only passion and pride and wounded self-love. They will part here to meet no more. We now drew near Benedetto. I touched him on the shoulder, and he turned round, but at first did not recognize me. Then I made myself known and said how I should rejoice to renew our early friendship in those higher spheres, in which I'd hoped we'd both soon meet again. I told him briefly that I too had sinned and suffered, and was working my way upwards now. He seemed glad to see me and wrung my hand with much emotion when we said goodbye, and then faithful friend and I went away, leaving him still seated upon the bridge, waiting for his last interview with her who had been once so dear to him. It was now but a painful memory. So think of that. So when they're saying this, yeah, he was all just absorbed and obsessed with this woman and completely in lust, right? It was all just physical desire. That is what we're here. Part of what we're here is to lessen the impact of those primitive emotions, and to think about, okay, what type of person am I loving? Is it just physical? Am I, you know, and so you've got to control yourself. The whole thing is for us to be here, control ourselves, control our passions. It's to rip out those primitive emotions of, just this complete passion and desire and that type of energy, and to replace it with positive energy, love, honesty, understanding, forgiveness, fraternity, all that. That's why we're here. So this is good for all of us to know. It's a great story. I'll carry on. As we were on our road from Venice to those plains, which I now understood to be the spiritual replica of the plains of Lombardy, my attention was suddenly attracted by a voice calling to me in the pitiful tone for help. Turning back a little way to my right hand, I saw a couple of spirits lying apparently helpless upon the ground, and one was making gestures to cause me to come to see him. So thinking it was someone in need of my help, I let my companion go on and went to see what he wanted. The spirit holding out his hand to me murmured something about helping him to rise. I bent down to lift him up, when to my surprise, he made a clutch at my legs with his hands and contrived to fashion his teeth in my arm, while the other one, suddenly jumping up, tried to fashion upon my throat like a wolf. With some trouble and a great deal of anger on my part, I confess, I shook myself free of them and was stepping back when I half stumbled and turning my head, saw what a great pit had suddenly opened behind me, into which another step backward I must have fallen. Then I remembered the warnings given to me not to allow my lower passions to be aroused, and thus placed myself on a level with these beings, and I regretted my momentary burst of anger and resolved to keep calm and cool. And again, this is something that I practice all the time. I fail all the time. It's like I was reading something kind of like this in Spiritism, where you need to be calm in all circumstances. And I was thinking about it, and then my dog just barked really loud next to me. I went wham and hit the poor guy on the head. I thought, oh boy, I just failed that test. And so we're tested daily on these things, is to keep our calmness, get rid of our anger. And so when these things happen, just go, oh, or say, hey, I passed, right? So just try to get in the habit of not letting things just, uh, make you anger real fast. I'll carry on. I turned toward the two dark spirits again and saw that the one who I'd fancied had been hurt was crawling on the ground to reach me, while the other was gathering himself together like a wild beast about to spring. I fixed my eyes steadily upon the pair, whom I now recognized as the man with the withered hand and his friend who had tried to deceive me with the false message a short time before. Steadily I looked at them, throwing all the power of my will into the determination that you should not advance nearer to me. And as I did so, they faltered and stopped, and finally rolled over on the ground, snarling and showing their teeth like a couple of wolves, but were unable to approach a step nearer. Leaving them thus, I hurried after faithful friend, who I soon overtook and narrated to him what had occurred. So, another great message. How did he stop him? Did he fight him? No. He used the power of his will and determination and dominated them, and that's what these warlords in the dark abyss do to other people. They dominate. They actually force people to change shapes. There is one account where one of these warlords forced people to change the shape into a chair. Another time he made them change the shape into horses so he could have an army with cavalry. And so these people with great determination, eventually they'll rise, but their determination is nothing compared to the determination of higher and higher spirits. A very high spirit, these people could not attack him at all, right? They just laugh at him. And on one story in the books by Reverend G. Val Owen, this group of, I think, 8 spirits went into this like mining town to free all these people who were slaves to do mining in this cave. And the warlord, the dictator of the city, however you want to call him, came, and he had this sword, and he started menacing to him, and then the spirit just came up to him, and the guy drew out his sword, and he just touched the high spirit, touched the sword, and the sword just went down like a wet noodle. And of course, then all the people around him laugh, right? Because that's the way people are down there. They're all sarcastic and mean and not very supportive. So he was not worried at all. I said, and then the guy said, okay, what do you want me to do? He just knew that there was no contest. It's like a 5-year-old trying to fight a 20-year-old. It's not going to work. Okay, I'll carry on. He laughed and said, well, I do that. So I get ahead. He laughed and said, I could have told you who those were, Franchezzo, but I felt it'd be of no harm to let you find out for yourself. And likewise, learn how valuable protection your own force of character and determination could be. And it's still true on earth. Your own willpower, which is you create faith by reading and studying Spiritism and by meditating and praying, and by listening to your conscience, because the more you listen to conscience, the more you naturally have a habit of following the divine laws, because your conscience is a set of divine laws given to you by God when you are put into this physical body. You're also given your instinct. I'll carry on. You are naturally strong-willed, and so as long as you do not use it to domineer over the just rights of others, it is the most useful and valuable quality. And in your work in the spirit world, you have found that it is the great lever by which you can act, not alone upon those around you, but even apparently inanimate matter. And I thought, as those two are very likely to come across you from time to time, you might as well settle now which should be the master and who should be the dominant personality. They'll be shy of directly meddling with you again, but as long as you work about the earth plane, you'll find them ready at any chance to thwart your plans if the opportunity comes. Okay, so that is the end of that. Just back up. So let me bring this up. So again, one of the things I'd like to say, oh, that's not what I wanted. Right. One of the things is, I just love these books like this because it's really talking about different aspects of Francesco's view of the spirit world and how Spiritism either backs him up or gives you more of a backstory of how these things work. So if this interests you, and I tell you, these stories And given what I know, they're not written by someone who just wants to, make a fantasy out. These are real stories of by a medium who translate who by psychographing from a spirit wrote about his wanderings in the spirit world. So I believe it's very important for all of us to understand what the spirit world is trying to tell us. We are at this time in 21st century where we've been given more and more information. In 1850s, in the Spirits book, Allan Kardec was given a lot of information, and he codified that information to the Spirits book, and with 1,019 questions. And it's telling us, what is the spirit world? Why are we here? How do we grow as a spirit? All these things, moral, all these things they're telling us. And the more we understand why we're here, what is our reason to be here, the more we can understand the ups and downs of our life. As I said before, very little is by chance. Very little is by coincidence or synchronicities all around your life. You just have to look at them and think about them. So I think if you're interested in Spiritism, you should read the Spirits book. Now, the way it's formatted is, to me, it's wonderful. But some people may want to read my book. It's a very short book, less than 100 pages, I think. Spiritism 101, The Third Revelation. You can download it on my site for free in PDF, so it will cost you nothing. Now, if you want, it is also in Kindle, paperback, and in Audible format. I actually have all my books on the right-hand side of my page, NW Spiritism, which a lot of them are in Audible format, but you can always get them in Kindle or paperback. So I would recommend you download this for free. And as I said before, the Spirits book, I also have it in a playlist on YouTube and in Audible format on the site, downloadable for free. And so I would recommend that for a lot of people who want to get into Spiritism. And then you can read the books by Chico Xavier. And then if you want more of really what is the spirit world, what we are, and learn the fact that the spirit realm was created first, then the physical world, what we are as spirits, how we grow as spirits, how we rise in the levels of heaven, how we're guided in our future. This is in my book, The Spirit Realm. Spiritism has revealed the reality of our existence. So I just want to say I'm happy everyone was here tonight. If you have any questions, always feel free. I come every Sunday night on YouTube, Sundays and Tuesdays. So, and on Tuesdays I've been talking about Franchezzo, who is just, hopefully I could meet him when I leave here and go to the spirit world and thank him for his wonderful book. There's many people I want to thank for the wonderful book. And there's a lot of people I want to apologize for being an idiot. So anyway, I want to say, everyone, God bless.